Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. There's about 1 minute left of morning.
Morning, everybody. Let's just give a couple minutes to have more people pile in before we start. I think with 12:03, why don't we get launched? And I know at least one other commission or task force member was available, but they may end up joining late. Um, but with that, I'll call the meeting to order. We are, this is our third meeting of the task force. We'll just call it the Public Act 25-73 task force. The second item is remarks by the chairs. Sarah, do you have anything to start us off?
Nope, Jeff, you're good.
Great. Um, I will, there are four other items, but they essentially all revolve around the same thing. Our time together will be coming to an end soon. So brief, so torrid. Um, but we are looking to essentially do a preliminary meeting today in terms of discussing what should go in our report. A draft report will be circulated at some point prior to a fourth and final meeting, at which point we'll discuss it and put it into final shape. I imagine that just in terms of logistics, I think we'll be sort of approving substantive points at our next meeting as opposed to necessarily wordsmithing. But to the extent that there's like wordsmithing and other things to do between now and the 23rd, when our report is due to the chairs of the planning development and housing committees, we can do that offline, not necessarily in a meeting. But by and large, we're looking to talk through substance, and really it's the report itself. There is a bit of a house style happening where, it'll discuss how the task force came about, who served, when did we meet, what did we do, um, you know, essentially setting a lot of prefatory remarks, essentially. And then we'll get into, here are the things that we, as a task force, endorse as areas the legislature could pursue to address the situation we learned about. Ariana helpfully on last Tuesday circulated the sort of buckets of proposals. And we're not going to sit and opine on as to like, which committee has jurisdiction over which, or what subject matters are cognizable under which committee, or exactly what the legislation should look like. But essentially, like, should the, 1 or 2 sentence goal of each proposal, what would that look like if you were going to address this situation? What are the different angles? And here's what they'd look like. So I am open for suggestions on this. I do not have a passionate sense of how this should be done, but we have the 8 buckets / policy categories. And looking for people's thoughts on whether they should be included. Should we edit? Should we add or remove? Let's take it that way. And I'm just going to walk through each of the 8. And I'm looking again at Ariana's email from 2:00 last Tuesday. So first off, looking at tax policy to limit portfolio size and disincentivize corporate ownership. Yeah, Dave. Oh, Dave, you're muted.
How about now?
Yep.
Okay, so you guys all know I'm looking at this from the perspective of, I'm sitting in my closed porch of my manufactured home right now. But some of the stuff that Rafi Podolsky and I have been working on, we've got drafted legislation that we have to meet with we're supposed to meet with the committee chairs sometime this week of general law and run it by them. I was going to send you what we have drafted now, and after talking to Rafi, I think just procedurally, I'd like to have them see it before I give it here, even though we have a
Sure.
and some other members of the legislative staff here. And with the also reminder that some of what I'm going to talk about could pertain to not just manufactured home parks. I hope that can be a goal long term. Whether we endorse it as a task force, it's not for me to decide. But on tax policy, there's a couple things going on. We are going to have a proposal based on Maine statute that was just enacted last year to disincentivize corporate investment. There's 2 things that they did up there that are going to be controversial. But one is they passed a statute to incentivize park owners to sell to residents via a capital gains tax credit, with the upper limit being $750,000. And then there's a threshold where they can be credited up to 50% of their capital gains, up to $750,000. We have that drafted. I'll be submitting it, and as soon as I submit it to general law, I'll can forward it to everybody on this task force.
That sounds like tax policy though. That sounds right on. So cool.
Yeah, and so then there's another issue. I don't know if this is really tax policy, but they have enacted. I'm just going to quote it, and we pretty much um, stole it from them. They passed an act to establish the manufactured housing community and mobile home park preservation and assistance fund, and it's done by a $10,000 fee per lot in manufactured home parks that qualify, and then there's some limiting conditions. Most important of which is entities that have over $50 million in assets, meaning the larger entities. We've talked about trying to keep out of-state corporations, and we had a meeting last week with their governor's staff on housing policy, and they searched for a way they could do this constitutionally, and this is what they came up with. There will be more details when I can send this out, but that's what they've done on trying to do target out-of-state corporations, and we basically copied it. There's also a proposal when we passed the right of first refusal statute 2 years ago. We tried to eliminate the transfer tax on the sale.
Mhm.
And we ended up, the owners didn't have to pay transfer tax, but the residents had to pay half of what would be their share. They have eliminated the transfer tax completely from in their state.
Okay.
We've copied that. Let's see. With one other thing. No, the other thing is different, not tax policy. So
Okay.
that's what I have to contribute.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. The 10K per lot piece, is that that is if you have a park owner of a certain size charging just like a registration fee?
It's like a
Or like
transfer tax. It's like it would be paid by the purchaser.
okay.
Uh,
Oh, got it. Got it.
You paid by the purchaser, and there's other, like, there's a language about whether they're registered with the state secretary of state's office, um, and or out of state. And there's a couple of other qualifiers that would put you, you would have to pay the tax or not. Resident-owned communities
Mhm.
would be a sale to a registered-owned community would be
Yep.
exempt. You don't have to
Sure.
pay it. And then there's a couple of other, I don't remember them off the top of my head,
Yeah.
but that's how that works there. I'll go into, they had several proposals that passed. The more controversial one is not tax policy, but these two, they haven't had much response to, other than that they've told us they haven't had a lot of court challenges.
Right.
Not a lot of court challenges, but then again, there hasn't been a lot of opportunity. You haven't even had people saying that they were going to buy a main park, and they
Right.
think it's because of these changes.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, it's discouraged the purchase outright.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been ripe for court. Okay, that makes sense. I just wanted to make sure I understood. So the idea is, and we can get into the nitty-gritty sort of beyond our scope, but the idea being that it sounds like whether or not it's a domestic or foreign purchaser, that's what we call our in-state versus our out-of-state, will trigger this fee.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, they can't do that like outright.
Yeah, sure.
They've tried to figure out a way that would withstand court challenge.
Yep.
They haven't had a lot of, since the laws went into effect, they haven't had a lot of attempts by out-of-state corporations to buy one, so it has not been tested. But there's another proposal regarding rent mediation that's been very controversial, and I'll get into that later on.
All right.
Yeah, those laws have, you know, they think that they've discouraged in the last, well, it's only been in effect for 6 or 8 months, but they haven't had any new proposals to buy parks.
Mhm.
Um, Now, with the caveat that neither have we in Connecticut.
Okay. Yeah,
So
right,
we don't
right.
know whether it's a direct cause of these new statutory enactments or something else.
Yeah.
There's no way to know.
All right, that's fair. Cool. Um, Ben, you're next. Lisa, we are just going through the items in part 3 of Ariana's email from January 6th, 2 o'clock, going through the buckets, and we're on the first bucket.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Yes, apologies for being late. I
Oh,
was
no, you're
stuck in a work meeting that ran over, so you know
no
how it
problem.
goes.
Yeah, Ben.
Excellent. Hey everyone, happy New Year. I know it's late to mention, but I just wanted to say I hope you all had a great holiday season. I was just gonna vocalize that it was definitely unexpected to see the president come out and make mention of the corporate acquisition stuff.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I just, like I said, given his general stance on these sorts of things, I was surprised to see that. So I think if you're seeing that at the federal level, as someone who's followed policy for quite a good time, it's always good to kind of go with the momentum of whatever's sort of being spoken on. So I don't have a lot of details to offer on this side of things, but I think that they're definitely, I just want to, like I said, vocalize my support for some structure for managing or making sure that when there are, at least when there is corporate acquisition, that owners of the buildings and these sorts of things can be tracked. I've been doing some research following up onto this meeting and have read about a couple different ways that whether it be registries, which obviously pull into this, but there's been a couple different ways to do this that I think could be effective. But obviously it'd be interesting to either, if there's an executive order or what ultimately comes out of this, to potentially suggest through the thing to align, policies so that we have sort of uniformity. Obviously, if there's some sort of federal policy coming down, making sure that the state one lines up with it and who has sort of, which one of those would be the lead / follow model is always important to do. So again, no real details on this or specific suggestions, but I think, it would be appropriate and to have in the report to have some structure or some component that either limited or held accountable. Off of that, just for reference, the Department of Housing in last year's session, one of our few bills that we suggested was the rental caps when there is corporate ownership. And that text still is out there and wasn't passed. And so it kind of ties back into this. So I'm not sure if we, through the report, want to go very specifically like tax policy, but I know a lot of times a lot of this stuff and the representative seen this process, they start as a 1 or 2 line concept bill. You bring up a public hearing and gives, people like Dave, who are obviously like very invested in this, an opportunity to come before the committee and with a public hearing to that extent. So things in and around that space, I definitely think should be in there. And again, with the process, usually like really going into the nitty gritty of exactly how it gets executed is can be a big time suck, and giving it to the sort of legislatures, LCO can kind of sort it out from a conceptual basis. I think definitely have some stuff in there. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Cool. I just sent around for those who haven't sorted through all of their emails for today. Not that I have either, but sent around something around both the president's recent statements and some other federal policy or federal legislation that's around some similar issues. Okay. The let's see. Anybody else on tax policy?
I do need to ask on this one that we may need to check how any of this would fall within the fiscal guardrails.
Mhm.
It's good if we have it, but if we don't have then a type of if there is a need to adjust to the fiscal guardrails, we will need to obviously consider that.
No, absolutely. We will, uh, we'll charge you with, ensuring there's no fiscal note with anything that we propose. If you can figure that out for us.
If I can just clarify with it, I do not mean that there is a fiscal note with this. What
Yeah,
I
sure,
mean
sure.
That is, I'm not sure that we want to make sure that because any money we would be taking in from something like this would require an adjustment of the fiscal guardrails, correct?
Right, right.
Yeah.
No, there's that too. All the things involving the, finance and bonding committee, if you'll straighten it out with them. All right, great. Let's go to the second piece. The statewide licensing and registry for both landlords and property managers. The property manager piece is to pick up the fact that many landlords own their buildings in, or properties, within, basically single purpose LLCs, but are essentially share common ownership and have the same property managers. And then there's others who are just property managers who may actually serve unrelated landlords in the market and putting very like a modicum of regulation around them at the statewide level, as opposed to what a couple of municipalities have done, may be useful. Any comments on that?
I'll just mention there's some great reports out about the effectiveness of this, but also of where it failed, and some of the challenges behind doing that. Obviously, challenges aren't, let's not do something, but thinking about, I think as we do it, from what I read, make sure to clarify dwelling unit versus building, things to the extent of another few things was like make sure to capture the single homes and duplexes. Sometimes these are written in a way where it only captures larger things, but I also, thinking about a number, like an initial sort of threshold that needs to be crossed. I would imagine if you're doing this for everyone owns maybe one or two properties, it's a second rental registry might not necessarily be appropriate, and always to remember to balance the needs of both the tenants and their rights and also the ability for landlords to do what they do best, which is manage property. So just want to vocalize endorsement for something to that extent, but just with balance to make sure that it is, works for both sides.
Yeah, and any materials you want to share as this, I imagine our report will be heavy on hyperlinks and appendices, including the materials we received during the informational session. All right. The next bucket is expanding tenant rights. For example, just cause, and it's one way of sort of limiting what fair rent commissions need to take on is just a straightforward cap on rent increases. Anyone want to speak to this? Yeah, Dave.
Well, having gone through a couple different rent cap battles over the past 3 years, I just my own opinion. I think anything with a hard rent cap is going to be filibustered very, very energetically by the landlords. So as an alternative, we've come up with a Vermont and Maine-based rent mediation proposal. We haven't decided on the threshold but it's going to be CPI plus something, plus some percentage.
Sure.
That a similar statute has been in effect in Vermont for 25 or 30 years. I may have mentioned this in a previous meeting, but I've talked to both Rafi and I have talked to the staff, the administrative staff that handles these mediations up there. And what we've been told is that, again, it works because very few people, neither the landlords nor the residents, challenge it. They have a CPI plus 1%. The landlords, because it's a lot of trouble to go through mediation, they can live with CPI plus 1%. The residents, because they're not happy with CPI plus 1%, but you have to have 50% of the residents in any community plus one to get to mediation. And so generally just accept it and live with an increase that's less than what they would usually get anyway. For example, in my park this year, we got a 4.5% increase, give there CPI plus one would have been 3.8. So, it's not, and there are people up in Vermont who've talked about repealing the CPI plus one and just going with CPI. I don't know what we're going to come down on yet. We're still weighing that proposal. But that's going to be submitted again as a proposed legislation this coming session. The other part about this that we've written a statute that says that's a modification of an earlier statute that says that if this law is enacted with the rent mediation and the residents lose, they would not lose their right to go before a fair rent commission as individuals. You can fair rent commissions, you appeal on an individual basis, and that's a proposal that we're going to submit as well. And then, I don't know what to do about places that don't have fair rent commissions. I know there's, the change it may limited the threshold. That still leaves out a fair number of manufactured home parks in smaller towns. Now, the other part about a rent mediation bill that we heard from Maine is this statute is the one they're having the most trouble with. And the trouble that they had was that immediately after it went into effect, or immediately after it was signed by the governor, some, not all, but some park owners immediately raised their rents before the statute went into effect. I don't know how to address, we don't know how to address that either, but I think it's something we'd have to live with. And maybe residents could take the this is why the Fair Rent Commission thing is still important, is that maybe the residents who have one could have the opportunity to challenge it at the Fair Rent Commission level. But then we'd have to figure out, how do we get, I know there's people that are and the Qual that are very big advocates of fair rent commissions, and I am too, but I'd really like to find a way to, and I don't have any, Rafi and I have kicked around the idea of how to address it, and we can't really come up with anything other than make it as short a possible effective date as we can.
Yeah.
So that's what I have regarding limiting rent increases and addressing fair rent commissions.
Okay. Yeah, Sarah.
Dave, I actually have a drafting suggestion to fix that for you, which I could share with Rafe if you all remind me, but basically doing a 12-month look back period. So it can be done.
Okay.
But I was just gonna see if Dave and others, if you would be okay adding like the Vermont style rent mediation program to this list, and we could also add the Department of Housing proposed rent cap after corporate purchase. So it's because I don't think we have to limit it to just one or two expanded tenant protections. I think it could be more than one.
Well, we're submitting Vermont style mediation. That's going to be one of our proposals. It's it's kind of a hybrid of what Vermont's done and what Maine's done. But yeah, we have it drafted. It just has to be tweaked, and probably hopefully no later than this week we'll submit it to run it by general law.
And I think as a identifying it as a tool just for the sake of this task force is all we need to do, and we don't want to step on it, and we're looking for more good ideas rather than fewer. Just while it came up, Sarah might know this off the top of her head. For the sake of the rent cap legislation that was on the table in, was it 2023? That was, I don't remember, what was the formula there?
Well, there were a bunch of different bills, which
Yeah.
ranged from I think 3% to maybe 7 plus CPI. I can't quite remember.
Yeah.
So it was sort of all over the place. I don't know that we need to specify a number.
Yeah.
Um, but we could.
Got it. Okay.
Or yeah.
Um,
I just want to make sure that we understand. We're doing a proposal for rent mediation,
Mhm.
not a rent cap.
Yeah.
We've been through these battles before. The landlords, whether they be apartment landlords or manufactured home park landlords, they're going to say it's a rent cap, even if it's not. So, but I think we need to try to um, to structure it and advocate for it very strongly that it's not rent. You have to, in our proposal, 50% of the residents of each park plus one would have to get together and ask for mediation.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there is no cap, or they can do whatever they want. So we need to sell it that way.
Okay. Cool. Anything else on this part? All right. Um, Next piece is on empowering municipalities. There were three subparts. We had the expanded housing code, inspections and licensing regimes, which is more support for fair rent commissions. I think this might involve combination of staffing and maybe there's some state level support that could be provided. I know they have their own they are their own working group. They've organized within each other. With that being like especially been staff driven there, but that's been one way that they've been um, lending support to each other. And then also for under this subpart, municipal authority for limits on portfolio size and tenants' rights. That being, in other words, municipalities themselves deciding to provide, overlays above what the state may provide as a floor.
I'll just mention,
Ben.
Jeff, that as a result of the passage of 8002 or Public Act, I believe it's 25-1, the new requirements to lower the threshold to include municipalities, 15,000. So prior fair rent commissions required 25,000. Now it's down 15,000. That adds 30 more municipalities into the mix. There has been a push for the to smaller communities that even fall underneath that threshold to join a regional entity, and in scenarios where the regional entity is sort of created, a number of different cogs are kind of pushing their members to join that regional thing. So a potential suggestion, if we're going to be looking at these things, obviously let's not reinvent the wheel, support the structures that already exist. So if we're offering that through, maybe additional, something to the extent of additional funding to the cogs to support or bring staff on that can function as a point person for either local or regional fair rent commissions could be something to consider putting in that. Continued partnerships to offer technical assistance for communities that want to do these things. And then maybe the potential of standardizing some of the powers. As I'm sure you're all aware, the Fair Rent Commission is only empowered to do what the town that creates it grants them power to do. And we've seen a variety of different, you have something like New Haven where they're empowered, lots of power to some of the smaller communities that have, basically just arbitration. So suggestions on this one, like I said, strengthen the existing model, consider throwing more resources at getting these online and up thing, but I'd be hesitant to want to push for any major changes or suggestions to change the Fair Rent Commissions, just given that there was just a legislative victory to lower the threshold. And I think it might be a little bit of a sticker shock to some of them to say, hey, let's maybe drop this down another 10,000 or something to that extent. Whereas there is an option to sort of encourage those communities that are smaller than that to join the regional model, which might be more effective for them. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Got it. Okay. Sarah?
I was gonna say something else. I agree. I think as long as like larger cities in particular, I think it's important that they continue to run their own fair rent commissions because it wouldn't work well with smaller towns. So like balancing the provision of resources for COGS and like the cities or larger towns. I was just gonna provide a little context on like D3, which is that like right now, there really is not municipal authority to regulate housing except as it concerns like health and safety issues. And in other states, municipalities are allowed to, like enact their own just cause laws, regulate the housing market in different ways. So that's why 3 is on there, which would give towns more and cities more flexibility around that.
Okay, thanks. And Lisa.
Yeah, so I'm not sure like where this falls, but I kind of feel like it lives somewhere around here around tenants' rights and codes, and it definitely ties in with these private equity firms. But it reminded me of a news story from, I don't know, like 2 years ago, like right around this time of year. It was freezing cold, and right here in East Hartford in my community, not where I live, but nearby, an apartment complex didn't have heat. And they had, and this made the news story. It was on like NBC Connecticut. I can send you the link if you want to refresh your memory on it. But they didn't have heat. The company was non-responsive. They had a deadline. They didn't meet the deadline. So they called the mayor's office, and the mayor's office came in and tried to get in touch with the private equity company that owns this community, this apartment complex. No response. So thankfully the mayor's office was able to step in, and the town got them in hotels or whatever in the interim. And as far as I know, yeah, I'm not really sure what ended up happening with the company, but as it looked on the news at that time, they didn't respond. So, I mean, I'm assuming they eventually did get their heat back. But it just kind of goes to the point that, something needs to be done with these equity firms, and they need to be a little bit better with their tenants and their people. And I'm happy the town was able to accommodate these people in their homes, and put them in hotels. But yeah, so I don't know what the answer is with that. But I thought that kind of lived in sort of what we were talking about.
No, it's been I am not the maven of probably of this task force in this particular area here, but I do know that to the extent that even with some of the licensing regimes, when you have an out-of-state landlord, one of the practical issues that comes up is to the extent that we have criminal consequences for housing code violations, the ability of a state prosecutor to pursue someone who does not enter our jurisdiction and is like the principal, it's difficult. You don't arrest the LLC, you have a responsible principal, and getting them into the state for the sake of pursuing this type of prosecution is often quite difficult. But this is the part where I stop talking and I let the actual person who knows this better than I do, Sarah,
I mean,
talk.
there's like that like gets to all the layers of problems because it's like East Hartford, for example, does not have, I guess they just implemented like a form of landlord licensing, but I think I know what story you're talking about and what building and the landlord. And that guy is very hard to reach. And so a lot of times the municipalities don't have a name or a contact information, or if they do, it's just to like a shell company that ends up being like a post office box in New Jersey. So one of the important things about landlord licensing is structuring it in a way where you're requiring them to give the actual names and contact information for the humans that are behind it and a responsible person in state who can be contacted in case of emergency. And I mean, in the event that they're still not able to get the landlord to take responsibility, something, that other municipalities already have ordinances for, which I think could be expanded and strengthened, is allowing the city to step in and take action to remedy dangerous conditions with minimal notice to the landlord, if they're like being non-responsive, and then assessing those costs. I think you might have to change the statute, but I mean, potentially plus interest to the landlord as a lien on the property. That's something Hartford has done in some instances after a lot of tenants push the city around that, so that people aren't just like playing this waiting game of not knowing. And I think with landlord licensing too, I mean, again, I don't know that this is the only solution, but the idea is that you're getting someone in there to inspect before the heater, the 50-year-old heater or whatever explodes or whatever happens. So
Right.
it hopefully staves off some of those things as well.
Thank you.
And we also just need like an extradition treaty with certain states. Like, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but
Limited number of states.
yeah, there's only could name two and we'd cover a lot of the issues. Dave.
So I just want to say quickly that I believe that the task force as a general stance should be it should go towards the increased level of regulation and to try to keep things affordable. Landlord licensing comes into effect in manufactured home parks. And this is something that DCP doesn't, I'm not sure I know if they've ever done it, but if they find a company to be in violation of a statute or regulation, they can suspend their license. And if they're not licensed, the statute says that they do not have the right to collect rent. So if I don't know 7-148 that well, but I don't know that that's a part of it. But I'm just saying that it would be another tool that might be at the disposal of residents if the landlord was licensed and they could challenge via DCP a violation of state statute or regulation. As far as the previous discussion about fair rent commissions, I think we should be strongly in favor of trying to empower them. But I also want to go back to the idea, and especially from the standpoint of trying to get smaller communities to join voluntarily a regional, because I have 2 communities in the state who have petitioned for a fair rent commission and been able to get it. And one of them is controlled by an out-of-state landlord that's just, they could easily win a fair rent commission complaint because there's an abutting property, another mobile home park, that charges $200 less than the out-of-state corporation and supplies inferior services. So if we could get that community covered by a fair rent commission, I think they could win a complaint that would have significantly affect their lives. And I don't know how. I can't help them. We can't help them. So I think the task force advocating for strengthening fair rent commissions and covering more people, I think we should do that 100%.
Sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Dave, your comment made me remember that there did used to be a statute in Connecticut for, like regular rental housing, that if the municipality required a certificate of apartment occupancy, which is sort of like a scaled down version of landlord licensing, and the landlord didn't have it, they were not able to collect rent, which was amended, Jeff may know, like maybe 10, 15 years ago. Maybe you don't know. It was removed, but that actually was the law in the past. And so tenants did not owe rent in the event that there was not, a valid license if it was required. So that's something that could be changed or encouraged.
Yeah, it's something that should be looked into. I'm going to circle back to the earlier comment that Jeff made about, or maybe it was somebody talked about the president getting behind trying to stop out-of-state landlords and protect affordable housing. I mean, I don't think that this issue is going away anytime soon. This might be an opportunity to come out and be, if anything, more strongly proposals that are more strongly in favor of defending residents' rights and affordable housing. And I think this is a time for us to come out strongly in favor of. I don't want to do rent cap, but any other proposal I think should be on the table for us to get behind.
Yeah, Representative Benapace.
And it should be said that it wasn't just that, it was also something that was said by the minority leader in the House and in the Senate as well during this, that their concern about the housing bill seemed to tie back to these out-of-state landlords and was it private equity coming and acquiring it. So I think it sounds to me like a full-throated bipartisan endorsement that it's like, okay, let's do it then. let's fix this.
Yeah, I think we should try to catch the wave here. We should try to catch the wave.
Sounds good. We have, I think Dave, you already mentioned a piece on this, but strengthening TOPA rights for mobile home parks in our next bucket, but we also have expanding those rights to residents of multifamilies when those buildings are sold as well. So it's not just the mobile home parks themselves, but also multifamilies, which I think would involve, effectively forming a common interest community, like a condo or co-op in those situations.
Yeah, well, we've got the opportunity to purchase, but we also have a situation where a park owner with several parks in Eastern Connecticut, most specifically Norwich,
Yeah.
we believe has evaded that provision. And our proposal for this year on opportunity to purchase / right of first refusal is to remove the portfolio provision. We had to
Yep.
give that away to get it passed, but it's really, I mean, Jeff, I'd like to talk to you off camera at some point about this case. But we did speak with the Attorney General this past week about it. They say they're going to look into it and write a letter to the park owner to try to figure out what happened. But several of the parks that residents would have had a right to purchase under the existing statute sold since November at prices lower that were offered to residents. And it's to me and Rafi, it seems obvious. We've talked to a couple of other attorneys who've been involved in similar situations. Two in Massachusetts, who believe that it's similar to cases that they've pursued in those states. And but anyway, yeah, we're gonna try to strip the portfolio provision out of the right of first refusal statute.
And the idea is essentially, like, if your park is being sold, you have a right, you have a set of rights. If your park and others that are controlled by the same owner are being sold in the sale, the owner merely has to engage in good faith negotiation with the park residents, which is just a big weakening of their rights and takes a lot of the oomph out of the right to purchase. So anything further on that?
Well,
All right.
only in the sense that if we can get it moving for manufactured home parks, it can be used as an argument that, hey, it's not going to put people out of business in manufactured home parks. Let's try it for apartment building conglomerates.
That sounds good. All right. Next bucket is providing support and funding for community land trusts and limited equity co-ops. CHAFA's in this space and is often, involved in one way or another with limited equity co-ops already, and not sure about community land trusts, but interested in any commentary on this bucket?
Our proposal that mirrors Maine has the 10,000 per lot fee for the buyer if they're trying to target out-of-state corporations. And Ben, I think you'd be interesting. Our provision would, after being collected at the local level, the money would go to Department of Housing. They do something different in Maine, but that's how our proposal is going to be in Connecticut.
Okay. Next one is the first look foreclosure reform. And this would be, it's requiring essentially that people who would be purchasing properties post foreclosure or nonprofits essentially have the right to purchase the property prior to your private equity owners or any other institutional purchasers, or basically anybody who's looking to take a property and rent it out, as opposed to people who are, using their own mortgage and purchasing it and living there, buying the property. This type of program, HUD and others had in the earlier part of this decade. We're using this type, and in the 2010s, it offered, double the amount of owner occupants purchasing these kinds of properties. It was more likely to keep neighborhoods intact, filled with people who owned and lived in those properties. And it was particularly effective in what they refer to as, majority minority census tracts, where majority of the residents were people of color. So particularly helpful in those kinds of circumstances. And the current administration at the federal level has undermined and withdrawn these policies so that they're just back to a free-for-all for properties that HUD ends up acquiring post foreclosure. So this would be at least offsetting some retreat on the federal level in this area. I guess that's me commenting on G to a larger extent, but at least that's in my bailiwick. Any other comments or questions, thoughts on that? All right, H. I don't pretend to know which committee this would fall under. I'm guessing finance, but I really don't know who interacts with the state treasurer's office within the General Assembly, but this would involve regulating the investments so that we would not be investing state pension monies into the same sorts of institutional buyers who are then undermining state neighborhoods, state residents, state taxpayers in other ways. Any questions or comments on that bucket?
I think it's a worthy goal, but I have no idea how to approach it to the legislature either.
Yeah. And my, as a practical matter, I think some of this, to the extent it goes, we have so many of the staff here who help inspire, if not drive, some of this legislation. You have individual legislators who we joked before about putting all of this on Representative Menapace, but to the extent that he or his other colleagues want to take certain aspects of these proposals and can work it through the gears, that's the idea, is to provide a platform for those kinds of for anybody who's inspired to pursue these types of things. All right, so I suppose I didn't hear anything in opposition to including these buckets. Do we have other categories or other things that we want to add that fall under those 8 buckets that we have so far? Yeah, Representative Menapace.
And we're definitely using the realm of the Fair Rent Commissions a lot for this. And are you guys hearing me okay?
Yeah.
I seem a little choppy on here. But I wanted to ask, because one of the original things we had talked about was where we can best provide the resources and things like how to get in contact with some of these out-of-state things. We've obviously we've talked about how we deal with it if we were not able to, but I just wasn't sure if in the realm of, I don't know, a town that does not want to essentially remove an out-of-state corporation, if that's not their goal for it, but to work with them. Is there anything that we've really been able to find? Because frankly, I don't know if we've really heard about it, of how we as the state can kind of better offer those resources. Because right now, I don't know if it really, anything like that really came up in our informational hearing, and we haven't really talked about it today, but I just don't know if it's not practical. If it's just like, if the group doesn't want to get in contact, that there's not much the state can really do to help the municipalities get closer to that. I just wasn't sure of your all opinion on that, or there was something I've missed.
I don't, is there, so like the portfolio, the new owners of the portfolio properties in Eastern Connecticut, that's, well, there's three of them are in Norwich. That's, they, they, they've created separate LLCs for each property that are registered with the Connecticut Secretary of State with it's an out-of-state foreign corporation that goes to Delaware. I have tried to search the Delaware Secretary of State's records, and all it does is give the same address that's listed in like someplace in the Catskills to a post office box. And then you're at a dead end. I don't know what happened. I didn't go as far as to you can pay a fee supposedly in Delaware and get more information on these corporations, but would there be a way to require LLCs that are registered in Connecticut to identify I'm sure other people have thought about this before, but to identify a physical address or an individual who's
Yeah.
connected to the company? I don't know.
No, totally. You could do it. I mean, there's not, this is not my idea to be sure, but it's just we managed to do it with, liquor permittees, right? You go into a bar, you see who's supposedly standing behind the license of the establishment that you're going to imbibe at. So if we can do it for something like that, if we can bring like what essentially is already like a pretty mature industry, a mature area of regulation, and duplicate it in this housing space that's, without getting into the last, 400 years of the country, been pretty unregulated. I think it just takes like a shifted mindset, and it might take, I think I'm going to attempt to address what Representative Menapace brought about, but I think there's a combination of, I think there might be a few different things. There might be a level of support at somebody's place like DCP for staffing and licensure and oversight at a way that maybe DCP has not been empowered to do in terms of the municipalities. I think this licensing, it might be, and it might be, maybe just need to ask more clarifying questions first, but there are the licensing and regulation regimes there in terms of, say, proactive, uh, inspections of apartments before, for places that want to work with the landlords that are there, but just want to make sure that they have the resources to support the residents who live there. I think those are the ways to get at it. In other words, we could have housing codes, we could have, licenses, but we need, municipalities need the staffing and support to make those things real.
Can we just have ICE hunt them down?
There appears to be a right. There appears to be a surplus. We may transfer resources. I'm not sure if what the skill sets are of ICE and inspectors, but there's certainly an enforcement regime overlap there. I don't know if that picks up what we were getting at. But I'll look at other buckets. If other folks have thoughts, feel free to jump in.
I mean, if from what your comment is about the liquor store licensing, if we had landlord licensing, that would be an extension of an existing statute, and you might be able to make some progress that way.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, this new owner in Norwich, they've had a leaking water main all through December. It's as of last week, it was still leaking. And the local in Norwich has been issuing fines, which I don't think they can legally do under state statutes because it's a private road. But I told them to file DCP complaints, and DCP can issue fines and or suspend their license.
Yeah.
The licensing thing might be critical.
Sorry, go ahead, Representative.
No, I was just going to say that did very much was kind of keyed into what I was thinking. I mean, I know it sounds silly, but for any of these, it's like, I mean, the very last thing what Dave is saying is that we should have the problem with is that we simply cannot find someone to contact for these places. And this is happening too often that they not only do the residents not know who to contact or can't get a hold of, but the town. And I'm just like, there's got to be a way that at least the state, hopefully, that we can get someone to listen on this. And it sounds like the issue may be much broader than that, but as I said, it seems absolutely ridiculous that we can't, at the very minimum, help these places be able to contact the actual owners of these locations.
I mean, I think the state could have, I mean, like portions of a licensing or registry program could be handled by the state, and then portions could be handled by the municipality at their option if they wanted to go further. But I mean, just thinking like to have someone to contact, one way is adding that for any corporation that's registered in the state is requiring that information. Another would be to do like a statewide rental registry where I think like we were talking about, there could be a threshold for size, like number of units owned, but if you owned a certain number of units, you have to register them all with the state and provide the detailed contact information, and that could be run by, I don't know which agency. And then, to allow especially smaller municipalities to have that information without having to run that themselves. And, theoretically, a municipality could also require like additional inspections. Like I do think it's best for every unit to be inspected so everyone knows it's safe. I mean, that's what we expect of like a restaurant and things like that, that it is being inspected. But if the state didn't want to go that far, having that statewide registry could support a municipal system to also require inspections at regular intervals.
Thank you.
And it might even be through another existing regime or the regional health districts that provide that kind of support. Sometimes it gets a little bit Kafka-esque would be too much, but it can be a little ridiculous at times when someone is dealing with, especially in a smaller town where the person who's handling an inspection is also the person who does building permits. And those can be complementary skill sets. They can also be a little bit, especially if like, depending on how many inspections they prefer they do each year may not be ideal. And then you can have, one person is handling whether or not the vents are working and whether or not the plumbing is working, whether or not the floors are wet, where another person is handling an entirely different government agency is the one that handles, vermin or mold. So you can get some silliness, but I think, maybe to the extent that there needs to be there can be support for those small towns if we do it either through the regional agencies or at the state level.
I do have another thought on this. In an ideal world, we'd have authority, whether it be state, regional, local, whether it be a Farron Commission, whether it be DCP or some other licensing commission. I think one of the issues, like DCP has the right to suspend someone's a park owner's license, and then at that point they couldn't legally collect rent. Fair rent commissions, we can see what they've been attempting to do in Wyndham. But what happens is, as what happened in Wyndham, the landlord will sue in court, and I'm sure everybody knows that that's one of the. If you create the authority, that's one of the dangers of the enforcing authority taking action, is fear of defending a lawsuit and costing them a lot of money. I think if we do something like this, we also have to think it from that perspective, backstopping, whether it be a municipality or a regional authority, backstopping them with help defending a statutory challenge. I don't know how you would do that. But I do think that would be a problem, even if you could get these kinds of things enacted. I just want to make sure people are thinking about that.
Yeah, from your lips to God's ears. We're
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was the meeting I had right before this is on dealing with something along those lines. And look, some of it comes down to um you get a motivated landlord who's, looking to do lawfare to challenge some of these things. And that's the good news is that, we're a small enough state that we at least know each other and can coordinate some of those resources, including to the extent that people who are involved in housing and people who are involved in municipal representation can, um, can work together when those things are needed. And, hopefully we get some good case law to back up, all the work that's being done on the legislative side. And can bolster, going forward work done, and continuing the work that's done by the executive branch. Okay. Anything else before we move on to our last two agenda items? Any other buckets that we want to put in? Okay. I do want to make one pitch for, sending any of these materials or anything else for the sake of our eventual appendix and references so that it'll be easier for legislators and legislative staff to, look back and see, what it is that we're talking about. I mean, not that they won't be able to reach out to us, but sometimes it's always easier to click on a link and get an explanation than try to track one of us down or one of the speakers down. In terms of the next meetings, between Sarah, Mike, who is now our wizard behind the curtain for the next 11 days, and I will try to figure out times that work for a final meeting as soon as next Wednesday afternoon, but maybe Thursday, maybe parts of Friday. And to be clear, I am the person is the biggest pain with what my schedule is. We did manage to buy ourselves an extension, but into the extension has bought us time into when I'm personally the busiest. But regardless, we'll try to come up with some proposed times, get them circulated. So look out for emails shortly on that. And in advance of that meeting, we will also try to get you hopefully 24, 48 hours, something that looks more like, a draft report before we send this in a final form off to the chairs. But if you have any, big scheduling preferences, by all means, send them over. And with that, can I entertain a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Oh, second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
We'll talk soon.
Thanks
Thanks.
very much.
Bye.